Hello everyone, welcome back. To be honest, I struggled a little bit with what to do for this video, because the video that came out last week, the Read Your 14 Spells short that I did, I was originally going to do last week, but the wizard accessories that I ordered didn't come in until I was partway through filming the thing that I was going to do instead. Uh, and then, as I was doing for this week, I wasn't really satisfied with what I did. To me, like it was an interesting topic. I was going to do like how to get into D&D, which is fine, but I think it's pretty easy to get into D&D. You can go to any game store; they'll set you up with a starter kit or tell you what books you need if you want to start playing as a player or as a DM. So I kind of decided I didn't want to do that, but I also didn't want to do another roll call because I'm about to go on vacation and I didn't want to do a whole lot of editing, but I still wanted to get the content out that I promised I was going to do, which is a weekly D&D themed thing. So I think what I want to do today is talk about making characters, and I don't mean checking off boxes or filling out a character sheet. I mean like coming up with a character concept that you like and really works. Because I think sometimes people struggle with that part. And it's where you get a lot of tropes like, the horny bard or the edgy loner. And those are fine tropes. Like, if you want to make a horny bard or edgy loner, that's fine. But there's a way to do it and then there's a way not to do it. So I kind of just wanted to, give you guys some ideas if you have never made a character before on how to go about creating a character. So the first thing I think that needs to be, well, not so much explained as reiterated, is that D&D is a game where you and the DM and the other players are all making a story together. So your character isn't going to be the same character by the end of the campaign that you started with. Because, at least ideally, there'd be character growth. I think one of the best examples of that is, Vox Machina and Critical Role. Because you have like the horny Bard Scanlan, which can sometimes be a very irritating trope to have at your table, especially if it's done very obnoxiously and sometimes uncomfortably. But at the same time, the way it works in Vox Machina, it actually works really well because the horny Bard Scanlan doesn't want to be the horny Bard. He wants to actually find, he wants to find love, and then they introduce his daughter at one point, and he has to struggle with the idea that, okay, he's actually a father. So that's just something to keep in mind. Keep in mind that you're deciding where your character starts, not where your character ends. Another good example from Vox Machina is Percy. Starts being like the edgy loner, the kind of the vengeful, the avenging vigilante to get revenge on all the people who killed his family. But of course, it becomes more complex than that, and he finds out, his sister is alive, and basically, literally struggles with an inner demon. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. You kind of want to, you don't necessarily need to lock yourself into a character arc, but you do want a general idea of what kind of decisions your character is going to be making across this. Because, here's the truth is, it is satisfying to have that character that, goes through that growth. It can also be satisfying to have that character that, just can't grow, and that's the tragedy of them. And then eventually that might be a character that just falls out of the party, or even like becomes a villain for the DM to use. It's like imagine like a alternate universe where Percy couldn't let go of revenge. He becomes possessed by his demon, and then Matt Mercer now has like another little toy in his toy chest that he can play with whenever he wants to, have a plot device happen. So again, something to keep in mind. But where to start? The tropes are tropes for a reason. You have Grog the dumb barbarian, you have the horny bard, you have the valiant, trustworthy and upright knight. You have the very smart wizard who is smart but maybe not wise. Things like that. So it's always easy to start with one of those tropes and then go from there. Another thing you can do is I have what I call the Frankenstein approach, where you can take actually several characters and kind of like just snip pieces off of them and put them together and have a character that's like a little of everything. I think I think a lot of people like Dragon Ball, very obviously, and I think it's a fun thing. There's a lot of like good characters in Dragon Ball. I think because so many of them start out as Goku's enemies and then become good guys. But the result is that they're still very flawed. Particularly Vegeta. Like I think Vegeta is a very interesting character to look at. The way he starts out evil, like he freely admits that he's evil and he's not a good person, but he softens up and he doesn't get there, over even the course of like one arc or two arcs. Like pretty much it goes all the way to Dragon Ball Super to the point where he's like, mostly good. He's still a little abrasive around the edges even at that point. But it's an interesting thing, and he's a character that struggles with a lot of stuff, like the fact that he is basically a prince, the prince of all three Saiyans. Two and a half actually, or at least at that point. And then you can take that, you can put it with other characters. You can put it together with other characters that have that same trope too, but are maybe different. Like another one, Code Geass. It's an anime I really like. So you can take like a little bit of Vegeta and a little bit of Lelouch Lamperouge, and put them together and create a nice character. But I would say like don't go any more than like three characters because you don't want to. If you put too many tropes together, you kind of come close to becoming a Mary Sue in terms of what you're creating. Because it's like, oh, I want to be Vegeta, Batman, Shadow the Hedgehog, and like several other characters, and it's like just kind of pick a lane. You don't have to go crazy. You don't need three, and if you feel you can do four comfortably, that's fine. But it's an easy way to like just pick out bits and pieces and kind of just smush them into a backstory that kind of works. And in this way, you don't even need to necessarily think so much about what your character does because it becomes like, okay, well, you have the Vegeta personality, so what does he do? Well, maybe his flaw is that, if you insult him in any way, he takes that very personally and it causes problems for the group. But not too many problems. You have to walk the fine line between causing problems for the group as a character flaw that progresses the story and causing problems from the group because you're a problematic character and you're causing problems at the table and not just in the game. So another thing to keep in mind, you never want to make a character that necessarily acts against the other players, outright. And if you do, like let's say you feel your character would absolutely like maybe there's an artifact that they really want. Maybe that's something you talk to the other players with before you go stealing their stuff. Like, hey, I kind of want to do this as a character thing because my character really wants this. Is there a way we can do this? And always get consent from your fellow players because D&D is not a game that is made for PvP. It's one of those things where the PvP is not what it's designed for. It's meant to be going like 4 players or so against monsters. That's what it's built for. There are like some like homebrew PvP rules that people make, and that's fine. But your dungeon master might not also have those, so that can be kind of problematic if suddenly you want to do this and your DM doesn't have the resources to do so. The other thing you should consider is do consider what your stats are, and I don't mean like in terms of like game mechanics. I mean in terms of like who your character is, because I think one of the things or at least I hope I pointed it out. I don't always remember, but one of the things I always like to point out is like you have your 2 primary stats. After that, you're probably going to want Constitution if that is not already one of your primary stats as like your 3rd stat, and then you have everything else. And so I'd say those 3 stats at that point are largely flavor. So if you want to say make the rogue who is not smart, then you can make intelligence your dump stat, make the other stats your not quite dumped stats, and then go from there and make that part of the basis for your character. So like maybe your rogue is actually impulsive and they do things without thinking. Maybe they aren't the smart one, but they know someone who is smart. Something like that. Or you know what? Well, rogues you generally do put some charisma in because they get a lot of skills. But there is something to say if you don't want to make a charismatic rogue, you don't have to make a charismatic rogue. Like you could just make this assassin who's just kind of very gruff and short and doesn't. Again, I say don't doesn't play well with others, but do keep in mind that you have to play with others. Your character doesn't necessarily have to, but that's part of the contract. Is you have to make a character that wants to go on the adventure, go on the mission, etc. And the same thing, or another good one is like paladins. Like paladins, okay, they got the charisma, they got the strength. Those are the two main stats, but maybe they're not a wise paladin. Maybe again, maybe they are rash, or maybe they're just not perceptive. Maybe they don't have that insight into people, or maybe they're not intelligent, or maybe they're not dexterous, because paladins don't really need dexterity. Which, by the way, when I do a paladin for roll call, I'm totally going to teach you guys how to make a dex paladin. It's actually really easy. But maybe they're very clumsy. They don't have good dexterity, which I mean, mechanically, you don't always want to because dexterity is also a very common save that you have to do. But at the same time, the whole point of Paladin is that they have this ridiculously high, AC from their plate armor. But again, it's all things to consider. But it's an easy way so you can say okay, when you want to pick the flaws of your character, because you always want your characters to have flaws. It's going to be boring if your character is basically just whatever you make, and then then honestly, it kind of borders on metagaming if your character doesn't have any flaws, because it's like, I mean, maybe it's not metagaming. Trying to think of the right word for it, but essentially, it's a little boring if you have, because if your character doesn't have flaws, he doesn't, he or she doesn't grow. They need challenges to face in order to in order to become the hero that they are at the end of the story. At least ideally, you may be playing an evil campaign, but that's apples and oranges. So that's another thing to consider. Or maybe even their high stats have a strong flaw you can associate with them. Maybe your high intelligence wizard looks down on people who don't have high intelligence. Like oh, well, why don't you know this? Because this is common knowledge that I learned in wizarding school. It's like, well, not everyone went to wizarding school. Uh, the other thing to keep in mind when you're making a character is you do want to have a motivation for them. Again, this is part of the unspoken contract of D&D. Is your character needs to want to go on the adventure, and sometimes the best way for that is to have a motivation necessarily beyond the adventure, because maybe this adventure is the stepping stone to that. Like one of the funnier tropes, and even like the dungeon used to mention this one's like, if you're the wizard, like learning to be a wizard is expensive. Like if you look at how much it costs to put a new spell in your book, and considering you start with 6 spells, it's like, okay, maybe you have wizarding student loans you need to pay off. So okay, you better start adventuring and find those gems, find those rubies, sell them, and make some coins so that you can get out of student loan debt. Or characters that skirt the law. Sometimes they're in debts with the wrong people. It's the Jabba the Hutt scenario. It's like, okay, Han Solo, you owe me money. What are you gonna do about it? And Han's like, okay, well, it starts as a job, but it turns into he joins the rebellion. Other things. It's like maybe your character's already on a journey. Like again, like Vox Machina, like this. I started to keep bringing up Vox Machina and Critical Role, but it is actually a really good series. You have something like Keyless Aramente, where you're going to every single Druid Enclave or Sanctuary, or whatever, to basically kind of learn how to be a head druid, and like that's your journey. It's like you need to learn from the other druids. Or you know what? Maybe you're a wizard and your goal is really simple. Is like you just want a comprehensive spell book that has like every spell ever written. Which all the more reason for you to hold on to that spell book. Like Like, it's generally considered a dick move if you're a DM and you do something to your wizard's spell book to make them lose it, because that just means they have to spend so much time regaining all of that. But that would also be a good thing. In fact, that would also be a good, a good quest hook. It's like, oh, well, someone stole the wizard's book, and the wizard is adamant that, like, we need to get this back. But then, of course, as the DM, you take that, location where the book has been absconded to, and, that brings the party to something that's plot relevant. Maybe it's a lich who's like, oh yeah, I found out this guy actually has an inordinate amount of spells for a wizard, so I'm going to take his book and I'm going to copy some down or something like that. So there's that. Um, but yeah, so just it's okay to take inspiration from other things. I mentioned the Frankenstein method, but here's the truth: is like I have a player and he watches Vox Machina. He's the one that introduced me to Vox Machina. The cartoon, because I didn't have Amazon Prime for a long time. But even for this like campaign that I'm starting up soon, it's like he's basically like, yeah, I basically just want to play Grog. Like he's not going to actually be Grog, but it's going to be just Grog by a different name. And it's actually cool because this will give him a chance to go through all the new Goliath stuff with choosing an ancestry, which is also cool. So again, like he doesn't have to make Grog. He doesn't have to name his character Grog, and his character is still going to be very Grog-esque, and that's fine because again, that's a good trope to have. He can definitely be the typical big strong guy that protects the little people, and so that's a good place to start. You do have, I would say, try not to get into like some of the weirder things. Like there are people who've been playing D&D for a long time. They're like, well, I want to play a sentient piece of bread that uses mage hand to travel around, which yeah, again, this is why you always want to talk to your DM as you're making your character. This is what session zeros are for. Because your DM may not like that, especially if they want something that's a little more straight-laced. Like, not every campaign is going to be a comedy, but not every campaign is also going to be super serious either. There are those ones that are just like kind of right in the middle, and I think those are the best ones too. Again, Dungeons of Drakkenheim is a good example because there are some genuinely funny moments in that one. But at the same time, it's this dark fantasy setting where it's like, there's all these monsters and it's very serious and there's all this political intrigue going on. So again, another thing to consider. It's okay. Like if you want to play just like Darth Vader, except he's a good guy, you can do that. You can play like good aligned Darth Vader, where you're just like the Knight of Order going around and enforcing law. But like that's fine. That's a fine trope to have. Obviously you're not going to want to name your character Darth Vader because, again, it's there's copying things one for one, and then there's taking inspiration. So like, there's another YouTuber, Tulok the Barbarian. He used to do a series called Building Character, where it's like, okay, here's how you make Vegeta in D&D, here's how you make Superman in D&D, here's how you make Batman in D&D, etc., etc. And that's fine, but again, it's like you never want to go into a high fantasy setting and being like, yeah, my character's Spider-Man, twip twip twip, because that's just gonna ruin the immersion of it all. So yeah, I think those are the big points. Like I know this seems kind of like a short one compared to my other Let's Talk D&D, but at the same time, it's like I feel this is a pretty simple subject. But not everyone has that creative flow that other people do. Like some people can think of characters like by listening to a song or I don't know, looking at an ordinary object and being like, hey, that kind of reminds me of this or something. Some people can think of characters off the top of their head. Other people just, they just have that struggle with it, and that's fine. It's like, it's easy to make a character to start with and then go on a journey with them. And that's the important thing. Again, like, decide where remember that this is where your character starts. And that's the other thing is the other tempting thing is somehow it's like, your character, someone makes a fighter and they're like, oh, my character has already slain dragons and fought in wars and, is a veteran and all that. And it's like, okay, but, why are they now, like, level 1 in fighting goblins or something? It's like, because, the goblins are going to be a challenge for them, but if you're making this, like, super badass warrior, it's like, okay, but now they're level 1 now, and it takes the wind out of the sails. There are sometimes you can do that though. Like I think a good one is clerics. Like I think an interesting trope for a cleric is being someone who was a cleric, maybe did have all this power, something happened to have them shake or lose their faith, and now their power is like a whisper of what it once was because their faith is now, so depleted and drained to where it was before. Uh, or maybe you like pissed off your warlock patron, and it's like, okay, well, now I'm back to level 1. For more mundane classes like fighter, it could always be like, okay, yeah, I was a general, but then something happened and like they went to drinking and now their skills are rusty, they're out of shape, and they have to rediscover them. So like, maybe they know there's those maneuvers, but they're just not physically or mentally capable of like doing them on the fly anymore. So that's another thing you can do. But just be careful doing that, because again, you don't want your level 1 characters to have the same capability of a level 20 character. Because again, it's going to take the wind out of it when you're level 1 and, your thing is you're basically like you bump things on the head as a fighter, or, you only have level 1 spell slots, which, some classes it's harder. It's easier to do than others, and some classes it's harder. But, like, I think the wizard is one because so much of being a wizard is based upon you learning. It's like, okay, like you learn things, but it's hard to forget some things. Like if you spend your whole life like becoming a level 20 wizard, it's like you're not gonna forget everything. Like it's probably gonna take magic. Like okay, maybe you're a wizard and your memory was wiped, and you have to discover who you are. And the result is that you have these spells and like you discover you can cast them, but you don't necessarily know why or how you know how to cast them. Again, an interesting thing. Um, but I would also say, like, maybe try to avoid amnesia. Again, it can be an interesting one, but you have to talk to your DM about it. Because here's the thing is, if you don't have your memories, you still want to talk to your DM about what your memories actually are. Because your DM has to, put that in the backstory. And, maybe you don't care. Maybe you're like, you know what? Make whatever backstory you want from me. I just want to play a wizard, and I don't want to have to think of a backstory. I'm not good at backstories, so I'm just going to have amnesia. You can make my backstory whatever I want, and I just control my character from the amnesia point going forward. And again, there's stuff in that in fiction too. Like one of the favorite video games of Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, is spoiler alert for a game that's years and years old now. You're actually Darth Revan. Like you are actually the former big bad who was thought dead, but your memory got wiped, and then you have to struggle with that decision. It's like, okay, well, am I going to be a good Jedi now? Am I going to go back to being a Sith? Who knows? But again, like that's the interesting thing about it. But you have to make sure you talk to your DM, because your DM might be like, oh, I could actually make him this guy, and then that would work with this. And again, like, this is what session zeros are for. Always talk to your DM about your character. Even if your character is the most basic, my whole family has been a line of soldiers from, my great-great-grandfather to now, so I'm going to be a soldier too. And then you're a soldier and you become a fighter or you become a fighter class. It's like, that's fine. That's, something to consider. But, it doesn't have to be elaborate. But you definitely still want to talk to your DM, because it's like, okay, well, what wars has your father fought in? What wars has your grandfather fought in? Because there's history in this world, or at least there, should be history in this world. And it doesn't have to be something that comes up in session 1. You don't need to give your father or your grandfather's backstory in session 1. But, maybe the stories that they told of war have stuck with you some way and have taught you some valuable lessons. And so, like, that's why you're actually, a fighter and not just, like, a rank-and-file soldier from the monster manual. It's like, you've kind of learned some of these things, and maybe that's why you're a battle master, is because you've learned all these maneuvers, and, like, as you're going, it's like, okay, I'm going to try this trick that my great-grandfather taught me, and you do it and it works, and then it feels good. Like it feels like you're honoring your legacy. So yeah, so those are all things to consider when you're making a character. it never hurts to mildly plagiarize. In fact, D&D has a long and proud history between DMs and players of mildly plagiarizing stuff. There's plenty of memes about it where it's like, my character that's just this anime character, and the DM realizing that that the character you made is from the same anime that he's now plagiarizing for the campaign. So, it kind of works if you decide to make Edward Elric and then your DM decides to do a campaign based on Full Metal Alchemist. So yeah, I think that's it for now. Those are just some things to consider as you make your character. And if you guys have any questions or anything you want to add or say to making characters, just go ahead and pop it in the comments. I'll be always happy to respond. I like talking about the various characters that I think about and create. I think at one point, once I get through the 2024 Player's Handbook, I actually have a bunch of characters that I've made in the past, and maybe not necessarily gotten to play because I'm the forever DM, that I would love to just share with you guys because I think they'd be interesting characters. So until then, this is Sakrao saying, keep doing what makes you awesome, and tell me what are some of your favorite character ideas down in the comments. Thank you very much, and goodbye.